Hi, I'm Fred Valles, co-founder and CEO at Optimizer. Today, I have a very special guest in the studio, and his name is Chris Ma. He's a PhD candidate at Stanford. And I wanted to bring him in because even though he doesn't work in marketing anymore, I do know him from my days at Google AdWords. He was also in AdWords. But he's been doing some really interesting research on generative AI in education. And when I was reading the piece on LinkedIn, I was like, this is really interesting. And then I saw his name was on it. So I was like, let's bring him in because I think there's a ton of parallels to the study that he's done, what he's found that we can draw between education and marketing. So, Chris, thank you very much for being here and coming into the studio.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you for having me here. It's great to see you again after a long time.
Yeah. So I left Google in 2012. When did you leave?
I left in 2010. I did a couple more years in tech. I worked at Expedia for a while. I did a year at a startup. And then I did a total career 180, and I taught high school English in Minneapolis for a bunch of years. And now I'm at Stanford doing education research.
Okay, interesting. And so you started teaching English, and English seems to be one of these things that AI is really good at, right? And it can write amazing stuff. And so is that kind of what spurred your interest in this research?
It's really interesting. I think when I started my program, I was very invested in literacy. This was 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And I purposely had distanced myself from tech a little bit. But I started becoming more and more interested in learning technologies. And then I got onto a project around AI and writing a couple months before ChatGPT was released. And then when ChatGPT was released in November of, 2022, I just said, I'm going to lean into this. I've got a background that positions me in a unique way for this topic. And so I've been really invested in working with teachers and working with kids to understand what AI literacy looks like as we move into this weird new world.
Okay, so very interesting when you talk about AI literacy. It seems like one of the biggest and most important topics for the next decade because it all seems no question that AI is going to do a lot of the jobs that we've been used to doing. And one of the principles that we have here is you're not competing against AI, but you're competing against people who figured out how to use AI better than you have. Whether that's for writing or digital marketing. So what's your high level perspective on how should people integrate? Like, how do you learn with it?
How should you learn with it? I think that is a question that's at the heart of the research that I'm doing right now. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this study that we did recently. But I think at a high level, so I'm a learning scientist by training, and one of the things we talk about is cognitive offloading, which is essentially this idea that, hey, we can offload some of these, we can outsource some of these repetitive, automated, low order thinking tasks to AI so that we can spend more of our creative and critical thinking skills elsewhere. And it sounds great in theory, but the key is that second part, which is if you're using AI for certain things, the hypothesis is we also need to be shifting our creative energy to more productive, higher order thinking. I think a big piece of this question is around understanding what is useful for outsourcing and what should still be in the realm of human activity. And that's a moving target, certainly in education and probably for marketing too.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think, obviously, I'm in the marketing field, and what we've seen over the years is low order tasks like doing the math of calculating a bid, figuring out keyword misspellings. Great, give that to the machines, right? And then presumably, like you said, we should be focusing our energy on more strategic, more creative tasks. But I feel like there's so many people, so many practitioners who just fear that they're not going to make that leap. And for the machine to come in and do the tasks that they've been doing is going to put them out of a job. How do you push people to take that leap? Or do you think people are just so hesitant when they're in their career to figure out what is that next level? Like, I've been doing this fine, like 20 years, like I'm not going to change now.
I think so. I can speak from an education lens. A lot of teachers worry that AI is going to replace them. And I would say that certainly in education, relationships really matter. And the relationship between a teacher and a student really matters. We know that learning is social. Even if AI could do everything perfectly to the book, what a skilled teacher or skilled tutor would do, there's still a human dimension to learning that's missing. And I think that...
Okay, well, to pause on that for a second. So what is that human dimension?
The human dimension has to do with a lot of things. I think trust, motivation, those are two huge pieces of learning. If a kid is not motivated by what they're learning or by who's in front of the classroom with them, that's a huge barrier to learning. Trust is also a big one. If a kid doesn't trust that their teacher has their best interests in mind, but doesn't trust that their teacher knows the content themselves, they're not going to learn as much from that teacher. And those are big pieces of learning that have nothing to do with knowledge of the content or how you plan a lesson. If you have somebody come in and observe a teacher on one day, they're not going to get a full picture of that learning environment because they don't understand the relationship that teacher has built up with the kid over the course of the year. I think there are probably some analogies you can make with marketing, thinking about working with clients, where these relational elements are really difficult to approximate with AI, even if the content or the mechanics of a certain strategy are more replicable.
So AI has the broadest knowledge base and could teach anything, could do anything a client wanted, presumably, but it's just that they may not have the contextual understanding that comes in social interactions. And one thing that I actually find fascinating is that in work environments, like the juiciest bits that I get is going to a conference during happy hour.
Yeah.
Because what people say in a meeting is very different what they say at a happy hour. For sure. And so it's like it's that human element. Okay, you told me you cared about return on ad spend because that's what your boss was telling you, but fundamentally, this other lever, volume of conversions is going to be a bigger thing.
Totally. And I think you use the word contextual, and I remember from my days working in industry, like personalities matter. Sometimes understanding like, what does this CEO care about that's going to either speed up or block this process with me and my client? Personalities really matter. And we live in an age where we think everything is quantifiable and we want to think that data will solve all problems. But the reality is that at the end of the day, oftentimes it comes down to personalities. There's a great quote, I forget who it's attributed to, but it's not everything that matters can be measured and not everything that can be measured matters. And I think as we move into this world that's being driven more and more by data and algorithms, like we have to still remember that is not the complete picture.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And maybe I'll challenge you a little bit on that. So Microsoft recently announced some numbers that the click-through rate of ads, the generative experience was better than the ad click-through rate outside of that. Yeah. And so I asked them, why is that? And they said, well, that's because the machine ultimately has more data and understands you better. So you could get to a point where it understands you better than the teacher, it understands you better than the client, and it takes that into account as it's teaching you or making your campaigns. Have you seen that too?
I haven't, but I think that's a great example of this question of alignment. And I think what you're describing is AI is very good at when you have a discrete goal, it falls within the realm of something AI is good at, like optimizing a click-through rate. If that's the goal, AI is probably going to do that better than a human, but that's not always the goal. So in education, the process of learning is equally, if not more important than the outcome, the product. If I'm trying to teach a kid how to write, they could produce something probably very polished with AI, but they're shortchanging the learning process if they're not taking the steps to do the cognitive work themselves. And so I think that makes education different from marketing in that sense. In education, learning is like the goal in and of itself. It is a valuable goal in and of itself.
And so there's the early stage learning, elementary school, doing some basic math, we have to construct an argument. But then learning continues, right? And I think the reason that I put content out is because I'm hoping to educate people on marketing principles. And often that then goes back to what we learned in elementary school, like how do you divide clicks and impressions to get CTR. So I think that ongoing learning is super important. And how should people think about that at later stages of life? And I suppose the brain cognitively has been better developed, but there is still opportunity to basically set yourself apart. How do you see AI fitting in that?
I think it's exactly what you just said, which is you have to have that orientation of, I need to continue learning. I'm doing a PhD program right now, but I'm trying to learn R on the side.
Yes.
Because I understand that when I go to apply for jobs, that's going to make me a stronger candidate than if I was just a qualitative researcher. And the skills that I want to learn, those are skills that I don't want to be outsourced into AI because I'm not going to be learning them. But I could easily, as I'm learning R, I could easily just ask Claude, what's the code for this? What's the code for this? And just copy and paste. But that's not true learning. I'm really trying to make an effort to write the code myself. And then when I inevitably mess up and get an error message, I can go to, then
It's a great teacher because it's a teacher that's there 24/7.
It's there 24/7.
All knowledge.
Without AI, I don't have a personal tutor. I'm not learning it in a classroom environment. So I'm doing it on my own. And so without AI, I would probably have to spend hours on Stack Overflow, which is not a good use of time.
Right. So when you run into a roadblock with the code, as opposed to going on Stack Overflow and finding 1,000 potential answers and not really knowing which one, and sure they get upvoted, but it's still a struggle to then take that concept and apply it to your code.
Yes.
Generative just says, okay, here's how you would.
Yes. And so in this study that you had asked me about initially, like some of the teachers we talked to in this study really emphasize this notion of productive struggle and how students actually need productive struggle. They need to give something a try and to not succeed right away and to try again and to revise their thinking. And that's productive struggle. To me, browsing Stack Overflow for 30 minutes to try and find the right answer to an error message, that's struggle, but it's not productive struggle.
And so in education, your study found there's basically a mismatch between student expectation and teacher expectation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'll just give a little background on the study for your listeners. So my team and I ran a small study with a group of teachers and a group of students, and we wanted to understand what they thought learning and cheating with AI meant. A lot of teachers right now are freaking out about cheating, and my kind of theory going in is that's a little bit reductive and there are more productive conversations to be had. So we took a group of teachers, a group of students, examples of how a hypothetical student might use ChatGPT. One was with their writing. One was, please give me an outline. One was, give me 3 possible first sentences. One was, give me a list of counter arguments for this thing that I'm trying to write about. And the last was, here's my paragraph, please fix it. And basically what we found was there was general agreement around like what it meant to learn with ChatGPT and what could be productive uses of it. There was a lot more disagreement around what it meant to cheat with ChatGPT. This was both between groups, students versus teachers, and also within groups. Students had a wide range of opinions about what constituted cheating. Teachers had a wide range of opinions about what constituted cheating. Because everybody brings these different beliefs and schemas around what it means to learn and to cheat, it's really important that teachers and students are dialoguing and co-constructing some of the norms around what it means to use AI responsibly. I think when ChatGPT was first released, the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of educators that I talked to was, holy shit, let's just ban this and not deal with it. And I think that's pretty counterproductive. One of the teachers I work with calls this the abstinence-only approach to AI. And I think that is not the right approach. I think that right now we are seeing some reports in the workplace of employees being really covert about their AI use because they're not sure what their boss might think. Or maybe now they're getting their work done more productively and they're worried their boss is going to give them more work. The study just showed that people bring different histories with technologies with them, different experiences and different attitudes and beliefs. And unless they are in dialogue with one another about what it means to use these technologies responsibly, then we're acting on assumptions, and that's where a lot of problems come up.
So a lot of dialogue needs to happen. And this is one thing I do. So I have this little app, it's called Talk Notes. And I am becoming a little bit less good at thinking and maybe expressing things because I've now taken the habit of just dictating to it, and I can ramble. And at the end of it, it transcribes it and it says, here's what I'm meant to say very eloquently in 5 sentences. And I'm like, yeah, great. But I can see where that is making me a little bit less sharp, and I'm not being as challenged as I once was, and maybe taking the lazy approach to putting content out. How does that all fit in like how you think about students and doing their work?
Again, I think it really comes down to what's your goal? There's a whole theory of writing around writing to learn, writing to think, which is just the idea that, writing is not just a way of demonstrating what you know. It's not just a way of assessing learning, but it is actually a mode of learning.
And is that like some people learn by writing it down, other people are really good at learning just by listening to something, other people learn by doing something?
I think the premise there is that everybody, like writing, is a way of learning for everyone.
Okay.
It may not be your favorite way of learning or the most efficient way of learning, but it is a way that we learn. And for you, when you're using your voice app to take notes, you're still learning in the sense that you're thinking out loud and translating your thoughts into language. What you're engaged in is writing, is thinking, basically, which is translating your ideas into language. If you were going to put out a published report, you would probably have a really different piece of writing than what goes into your notes app. And that process of translating sort of informal, thinking aloud, stream of consciousness into a more formal report, there's learning taking place there too. There's probably a lot of just content writers out there who churn out content for a blog, for page views, and they've probably got it down to a formula at this point. And that, to me, I think a lot of that work will get automated just naturally. I think more people are worried, and I think rightfully so, that more creative and artistic forms of writing will also get automated away. And that to me is certainly concerning, but probably also more complicated than
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think what you're saying is like there's a means to an end. At the end, when you and I were both in marketing, it was to sell something to someone.
Yeah.
And the fact that Google had blue links, that's just the means. And so we were all writing blog content to rank highly. But at the end of the day, now that there's a generative experience that's giving us the answer more quickly, who cares about the 10 blue links? In fact, thinking about it, my God, I can't believe that I've spent the last 20 years of my life clicking on all these links, and I could have just gotten an answer.
And AI may make those 10 blue links more relevant, less gimmicky. And so to me, that type of ad is very different from a 30-second Super Bowl spot, which is much more of a creative endeavor. It takes a lot more sort of understanding of humans.
But I would argue that we're going to get there, right? So video is still a little bit behind. It's still much more expensive. It's not as easy to tweak, but even in the last year, we've seen huge improvements.
For sure.
And so this one notion that one VC told me about was like, listen, at one point in the next 5 years, you're going to sit down in front of your TV, turn on Netflix, and you're going to actually see a movie that was made just for you. The script was written, the visual is generated, because it knows what you like. And I'm actually concerned because you talked about the social element of learning. I'm like, but what about the social element of having something to talk about even?
Yeah.
And that leads that into an interesting thing too, but when you're talking about teachers and students, right? So students write for the purpose of getting a good grade from the teacher. If I'm like boiling it down to really what motivates them, right? Obviously there's the learning component, but the reason for writing that paper is because they want to get the A. You can imagine a world where the teacher is using AI to grade papers, and students using AI to write papers, and the bots are talking to the bots.
Exactly. You described two things that are troubling. One is the idea that students write for a grade. That's probably the reality for a lot of students. But that's not how it should be. Like, we always talk about how the world should be versus how the world is. And the way it should be is students should be in class doing the writing, doing the work because they want to learn. They want to improve their skills. It makes it difficult for students to use AI responsibly because they're motivated to get a grade, pass, go to college, like stay in school. Like, those are all things that motivate students that are not intrinsically tied to learning.
It is fascinating because even saying, okay, it was because you want to go to college. I'm not sure that we're already seeing people see the college degree as being less valuable. And people are fundamentally confused. In our space in marketing, Sam Altman has said 95% of the jobs that you all do in marketing will go away in the next 5 years. So as a budding student thinking about what degree should I pursue in college, it's, okay, which degree matters? What am I going to get at the end of that? And so that intrinsic motivation of learning, but learning to what purpose? And what am I going to get at the end? That's the big question.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. It's just, what is the future of work too? Will we just have more leisure time in the future?
Well, do you remember Larry? So Larry Page, he got up on stage and he said, listen, people only need to spend 1% of their time working in order to satisfy basic needs like shelter, food, medical. And that was really interesting because the point that he was making was like, we don't need to do all this work, and that is driven the fact that we want to do this work is driven by consumerism, and we want a bigger TV, we want a bigger house, we want a boat. But if we just were satisfied with the basic needs, we wouldn't have to work as much anymore.
Yeah, but I think that's both true and troubling. I think there's one vision of the future where maybe we just have more leisure time, but there's another where it's just, if, let's say Sam Altman's right, maybe 95% of the jobs that we have today are AI can do them. Well, maybe we'll find some other whole set of jobs now. Like the jobs we have today, some huge percent, I don't know what the percentage is, but some huge percentage.
Yeah, it was a thing they did,
is 50
the
years.
best one yet podcast I listened to was a study out of MIT, but 6 out of 10 jobs
Yeah.
from the 1940s, according to the US Census, they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And then even interesting jobs, something like tattoo artist, I think that was only really introduced in the 1980s. Now, obviously, people were doing that before, but it only became big enough of a category to list it on the census data.
Yeah.
To your point, people are fairly well employed these days compared to historical averages, and just that we've shifted what we do.
But even if you think about a tattoo artist, what a tattoo artist did in the 80s is very different from what they do today. Today, it's very much, you have to learn CAD. You have to know how to use design software. And that's certainly not the case. I have a colleague right now who's pursuing her librarian's degree, and that's a job which is almost entirely digital now. So even these jobs we call, oh, this job has been around forever. I'm using air quotes here. This job has been around forever, but the nature of that job has shifted so much. So maybe we'll see some of that too.
Maybe to wrap it up, but creativity. So creativity is obviously a huge thing in digital marketing. AI seems to be pretty good at coming up with new ideas, but like, where should people draw the boundary? And if we take the premise that humans are still more creative than machines, and we can point it in the right direction of what we wanted to do, should we be worried about that as well?
People get really fiercely protective of human creativity. And I think it's because we have this kind of impulse to think of creativity as uniquely human or inherently human, something that makes us different. To me, I think that AI certainly has the potential to enhance human creativity, and it also has the potential to diminish human creativity. I think we're in a transition phase right now where we're figuring out which is which. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's really about, I think prompt engineering is overrated. I think it's going to go away, but at some level, we need to ask the machines for the right things. And so I think oftentimes when people think about Gen AI today, it's like, hey, help me write a paper. What should be, I want to write about keywords. What should I write about? And it comes back, and you can take that at face value and just take one of the 5 options and say, okay, let's go and develop that one further. But I think where the creativity, the human element comes in is, okay, well, I'll challenge those 5 things, like tell the machine, oh, you're talking too much about keywords as they existed in the search marketing days. And now we have Performance Max, which is across a number of different channels. But it's basically like you as the human, you come in and you have that angle and that understanding of the world as it is today, consumer behaviors that may have shifted. So what is going to resonate? And so again, if it's like you could have sat down and you could have done slide deck after slide deck, and you could have done drawings and been creative the slow way. And I think Gen AI just helps you be creative more quickly and come up with proof of concept that you can then even test out more quickly. And so then there's also like combinatorial innovation, or recombinant innovation, I think they call it, where it's like taking ideas from different fields that you may have had exposure to. And the machine may come up with that, but you might also push the machine and the AI to say, what if you act as a biologist and write me an ad campaign? That's interesting. As a biologist, they come up with these new concepts that as a marketer, you might not have thought.
And I think that's one of the most powerful use cases of AI is this general category of giving AI a role to play and asking it to provide you with different perspectives. I think a lot of people see AI as like providing an answer or a response. And I think the much better use of AI is to produce multiple answers or multiple possible responses for you to consider it, to critique.
So all great stuff, Chris, but if there's one thing that people can take away from all of the studies that you've done, what do you think that would be?
So I think a couple things. One is, I think the overarching recommendation is we really need to build AI literacy. I think this is true for any field because AI is touching every field. In education, a lot of the work I'm doing right now is working with teachers, school leaders, and trying to figure out what professional learning needs to be in order to equip teachers and students to understand, evaluate, and use AI at a basic level. The second thing is, as we move into this new world, some of the skills that I think are going to be most important. One is improving our thinking about our own thinking. In learning sciences, we call this metacognition. And being reflective on what we're learning, what we're doing, our processes, is going to continue to be really important and more important now that AI is here and able to take on some lower order tasks. And then finally, I want to put in a plug for this idea of divergent thinking. AI is very good at the way it's trained is it ingests all this data and then it's going to produce what it thinks is the most likely next token or next word. So this is more akin to like convergent thinking, trying to converge on like the best response, the best answer. And so I think a human skill that's going to be really important in the future, increasingly important, is divergent thinking, the ability to come up with multiple possible perspectives, multiple possible solutions to a problem. And AI can help people do that as well.
Yeah, the divergent thinking I think is really fascinating from a marketing perspective because we've long talked about making it more personal, speaking to that one consumer. So I was talking to some people at Netflix and they're saying, hey, the future of car ads is the Jeep with you in it.
Yeah.
You've been placed in by AI and you're driving the landscape that you want. And that's within the realm of possibility now. It's not one car ad for everyone. And then by extension, like they're saying, it's not just ads, but it's everything, right? Open up your eyes and try new things. And as you talk to different people in life, whatever career you have, we always have a goal in talking to someone, right? And so the more that we can craft a message to get us to that goal, whether that's getting a new job, getting a degree, selling something to a customer, I think that's where AI can really help us because I have a specific way of talking about things, but hey, can you teach me how would I have handled that in this different setting? So I love that advice. Thank you for sharing it. Chris, thank you very much for sharing all those amazing insights that you had in your research about education. I think it really does apply to marketing or any other career that you have as well, because like we said, education is not a thing that stops after college. It keeps on going. If you want to learn more about Chris, he is available on LinkedIn. Look him up right there. And we've put the study in the show notes. Very interesting stuff. Go and take a look at that as well. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for the next episode.